Ask the Podcast Coach for March 27th, 2021.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music that means, hey, it's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm your host, Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com. And joining me right over there is the one, the only, Jim Collison from TheAverageGuy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. Good reminder with my shirt today, a good reminder that no matter where you're at, they're always the blood banks are always in need of donations. Blood donation month is January, but go ahead and get it set up now. Like we just kind of need that. So just a good reminder to folks, if you can give blood, do.
Yes. Blood is a good thing. The last time I checked, I like mine. I sometimes I get a little stingy. I like to keep it in my body. But
no, you know what? When you give it away, you get more. Like it's the body is really good at making more. So just kind of a great reminder as we come out of this global pandemic that they're in desperate need of blood donors.
Jim, are you feeling thirsty at the moment?
I am. Yeah, this helps with the blood replenishment. That's for sure.
There we go. And that, of course, that pour is brought to you by the one and only Mark over at podcastbranding.co, where he says, we help your podcast stand out with affordable, professionally designed website and artwork. He really is an awesome guy. I'm actually looking at his website now, again, podcastbranding.co, and it mentions there he's an award-winning graphic and web designer with over 30 years in the design field. He's been podcasting since 2013, and he's branded over 150 podcasts and really would love to help you look professional. The thing I love about it, every time I slap the School of Podcasting logo on it, or today I put the Ask the Podcast Coach logo into our artwork, it's just cool that you know you're going to look good. And Mark now he just added a new feature where if you're like, I'm not even sure how good my brand is, he will actually now give you a audit where you can kind of say, hey, here's what I have. He'll look at what you have and then work with you to figure out, okay, maybe we could do this or that. So when you need to look good, there's only one place you want to go, and that, of course, is podcastbranding.co.
Cappuccino, hold the phone. Take me home.
Yes, coffee. So, and if I want to share a cup of coffee with somebody, you know who I'd want to share it with?
Who's that?
That would be the one, the only, Glenn the
Hey
Geek.
guys, good to see you. I wanted to stop by for one reason, and that is I got this in the mail, and apparently it was done in my honor, and I love it. Look at this.
Don't be boring. Yes, I have my matching shirt on. Mine's in green, and Glenn's in red. And I was like, it was one of those things where I was trying to figure out one day. I was like, I forget what I was reading, but they were talking about a mission statement. And I was like, well, really, when I talk about podcasts, I don't want people to be boring. And I'm like, Glenn said it best. Valerie Geller has said it. A lot of people have said that. And I was like, well, if I'm going to put "Don't Be Boring" on a T-shirt, I got to send one to Glenn, because I should have had that queued up. I don't have that.
I think that's the first thing I said the first time you saw me at one of the conferences.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I think it was on your first appearance. And I'm like, any advice for new podcasters? And you're like, yeah, don't be boring. I was like, it's really it.
I probably had just gotten off a stint of listening to a bunch of boring podcasts when I got there. I was like, that was on my mind. Don't be boring.
Glenn, this is the elusive question. Okay, so if the idea is don't be boring, how do you be interesting? And Dave and I talk about this all the time. I think one of the things, and I'll just kind of prime the pump with it. I think one of the things that's interesting is when the co-hosts actually like each other. So like when there's banter and laughter and some of those kinds of things, when there's a good relationship between the co-hosts in it. What else are you looking for when you're listening besides that? What else makes it interesting if we're not to be boring?
I think part of it's natural too. Part of it is just you. You're that kind of person where you are interesting. Now, I do think you can work on that. I think you can become more interesting just with your voice and inflection and different things like that. I think you can also, I recommend everybody take improv classes. We did an improv session at last year's PodFest, and the room was packed. And, I think part of that you can work on, but I do think part of it's natural too. When I'm picking hosts, I can tell in 2 minutes and Dave, you could too. You could listen and go, okay, that's somebody I want to work with. But I do think you're right about co-hosts. My co-host on the morning show, we're at 2,600 episodes 10 years later, and you were still together. It's because we truly like doing the show together. We enjoy that. And you can tell hosts that are doing it, they don't really know each other all that well or even like each other all that much. And it gets uncomfortable for the listener. They'd rather listen to, I get along with you guys. They'd rather listen to the three of us talk than two people where it's really uncomfortable all the time. Right. Or they're negating each other all the time, which is one of the big mistakes with co-hosts.
Well, but that doesn't necessarily, when you say, explain that. What do you mean by negating?
Well, in improv, the first lesson is never say no, So you're like, you asked me to do something, I answered instead of saying, that's not something I want to talk about right now, and I move on, right? That all of a sudden became uncomfortable for the listener. Right. Whereas I said, you asked me to do something and I did it. I didn't say no. Right. We would fire, when we had the acting company, we did all improv for 10 years. And one fireable offense on your first offense was saying no. If you were on stage and somebody asked you to do something, whether it was pick them up and carry them off, whatever it was, you had to do it. You didn't say no. If you said no, I fired you that day.
Wow.
The cool thing about improv and why I think everybody should try it once, you will never be more intensely listening and in the moment with someone than when you're doing improv, because you don't want them to get done with whatever they've just thrown in your lap and you go, could you say that again? I was checking my phone or whatever it was. That's the thing. I had a guy once come on and we were talking about improv and we did some, and I was like, the whole time you're just like, okay, what are they saying? And it's amazing to just listen to your brain go zzz, because it's like, whoa, I am definitely, in the moment and listening. So
you just did it. I mean, Dave just did good improv. One of the things that I say in one of the comments, one of the things we say is yes and. That's one of the most common things you're going to learn in improv. That's the second thing you'll learn after don't say no. But Dave just did that. He said he took what I said and he built upon it. He didn't say yes and, but he basically did and built upon it. But that's the second rule of improv.
I think there's also a content piece in here, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be all about, you don't have to, only talk about those things. Dave and I talk about podcasting a lot, but it varies, but it always kind of comes back to the podcast. And I think there's being true to your subject, being a subject matter expert, whatever that word expert means, right? I mean, on the Horse Radio Network, I'm sure you get some horse enthusiasts. They may not necessarily always be the expert, but they might be a little more interesting than the expert in that case, right?
Right.
So sometimes it's just content, right?
Well, and actually, if we get Olympic riders on, sometimes they're the worst guests because they're boring.
Right.
Because they're so focused on what they do 20 hours a day that they really, talking is not their thing, right? So they sometimes when we get listeners on, they're the most fun, and we get more reaction to having listeners on than the Olympic riders.
I am editing now a podcast for literally like brain surgeons, and they're brilliant people. And when they get into some discussions, it's fun, but it's also amazing how many brilliant doctors, man, putting together a sentence. If I got paid by the I'd be retired by now in some cases. And
I hate to say it, I'm going to send, who do we send a hate mail to? Jim at hatemail.com?
Yes.
So send your hate mail there. But authors, when we get authors on, I cringe because it's either going to be a good one or they're going to suck. It's going to be one or the other. Because they tend to be, a lot of them are boring because they're authors. They're not talkers. They don't talk. But some of them are great, too. Then you get an author on that's perfect.
My favorite example of that is Alex Bloomberg, who's the guy from Gimlet and, all that stuff. Brilliant guy when it comes to shaping a podcast, but he taught a class and it was so obvious that he was out of his element. And he knew what he wanted to say and things like that, but you could just tell he was physically nervous. And consequently, and it's weird because I was watching this and I was like, wow, I can't believe how nervous this guy is because he's stammering and I look down at there's nothing but comments like, wow, this guy is like can't put two sentences together and he's brilliant, but like what? And I was like, this isn't his thing. He's used to reading off of a script that's right in front of him. So yeah, it's always interesting when you kind of get out of your element. It's not as easy as it looks sometimes.
Glenn, do you have when you interview folks for your network, do you have a rubric or something you use to kind of check things off, or is it just a feel?
I don't know what a rubric is, so I don't have one.
It's just a scoring box where you're where you're saying, okay, I'm looking for these kinds of things, and the closer they score, it's like a golf score, so to speak, right? So you're just kind of trying to figure out, you're grading them on a predetermined scale, so to speak.
One of the things we do when we bring hosts on is we have them on as guests. And a lot of times we don't tell them that we're looking for them to be a host.
Got it. Yeah.
So you can tell, again, in 5 minutes as a guest, whether the kind of person you're looking for. One is, do they listen? Dave brought that up. That's one of the keys. If you're going to be a good interviewer, you have to be a good listener. We don't recommend we don't send questions to guests ahead of time. Because if you're a good listener, you're not going to get to them anyway. I'm never going to get to those questions. I may get to them in a roundabout way through the conversation, but I'm never going to ask them in the order they're there because I'm following them. I'm following their lead. I'm going to ask the first question and see where it goes and then pick up from there. I'm going to have an idea of what my questions are. But I'm always going to be listening for where do I go from here that may be more interesting than what I had planned. Because they're going to throw you a nugget, and if that's going to be the nugget you didn't plan. The stuff that becomes, especially on a daily show like we do, the stuff that has become universal that we do all the time, segments that we do all the time, were accidental. They weren't planned. Our really bad ad segment where listeners send us hundreds of bad horse ads a week and we make fun of them was accidental. We didn't plan that, and we do it every week now. It's our most popular segment. We give away $500 worth of prizes every month to people who submit those. It's become that popular. We have sponsors wanting to sponsor it, but we didn't plan it, so it's the gold comes from the things you didn't plan.
Yeah. And I think looking, like you're saying, looking for those moments that happen. I mean, the coffee pour is right.
Yeah.
That came out of just doing it. And at one point, Dave and I looked at each other and were like, we ought to get that thing sponsored. Like, and it did. And so,
when you're late at it, I'm listening going, what the hell? He's getting thirsty. You guys forgot the coffee pour.
Well, speaking of sponsorships, I'm going to try something here. And I'm not sure that the people on Clubhouse are going to see this. This is the Rodecaster would not let me load files onto the Rodecaster today. I don't know what the problem is, but this is from Adam Curry. And in theory, now if you guys talk, you're probably going to hear an echo. So just so you know, but I'm going to play this file. It's fairly quick, but he's talking about sponsorship. Honest, he is. And
by creating the Media Roundtable. Yes, Madison Avenue has created the Media Roundtable, a group of organizations that aims to promote civility and stronger dialogue in media. It's launching a chart of what it considers to be the podcasts that display the most and least bias. The debut of the chart, prepared by research organization Ad Fontes Media, is part of a bid to get advertisers to support content of better quality in an area where the proliferation of niche outlets makes such stuff more difficult to track. So now they're going to have a list, and they're going to say, well, these podcasts, you shouldn't advertise on them. And if we catch you advertising on them, we will expose you.
So I thought that was...
I'm out of business.
But I part of it, I want to go, well, again, if we go back to the Don't Be Boring, I think those shows are going to have a hard time getting a sponsor, but it's, I don't know. This is a dangerous subject because we're right on the edge of cancel culture. And I was like, I don't know if I want to go there, but it is interesting that whoever those people are, making a list, and they're like, well, when in doubt, you attack the sponsors. And I was like, I don't think, Glenn, you have to worry about that. You've got a great relationship with your audience. You got a great relationship with your sponsors. So.
Yeah, not something, and the horse world's a little different. People are addicted. They want to hear my ads because they love hearing about product. We did once. We had a mattress company that we used here at the house for years, and I talked them into running ads. It was the worst thing I ever did. I got more hate mail from listeners saying it wasn't horse related, and I've never done a non-horse related ad since because they hated it. So no meal plans, none of that usual stuff, because my listeners just hate it. They just don't like it.
I think it's a good. I think it's a good reminder of who you're trying to reach. And by the way, I don't know if just because you get hate mail on that you shouldn't do it. For some folks, that actually may be a good indication of engagement in what they're doing. So, you may not want to take that advice at face value for your own podcast. But that being said, it was crazy the engagement I've done. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, Dave. Is it okay if I
go right? Yeah.
I've done the HelloFresh ads, and I got a little bit of engagement. Okay, so that's food. I did a technology one on my. This is a tech podcast, and I did a technology ad. Nothing. Like, it got zero. What I thought would get at least something, right? Got zero. And then recently, we've been doing an ad for a crypto company, and crypto's hot, and that ad has just done really, really well. And so, sometimes it's timing, sometimes it's how the audience responds, sometimes it's the needs of, I actually thought the HelloFresh stuff would do well going into the pandemic, and it was just crickets. Nobody, nobody took advantage of it. So I think, and Glenn, you do a lot of these. I think the ad space can be tricky, right? It's not a slam dunk, get an advertiser, right? Have you had, give some tips if you're in dealing with this? Are there one or two tips you'd give podcasters to be like, you need to know this when dealing with advertisers?
Getting them or dealing with them after? Because I think they're two different things.
Oh, well, let's maybe cover both then on that.
Okay, so
getting them and dealing with them.
Getting them is relationships. It's still relationship business. It always has been. Sales is always about relationships. That's not changed since I started sales 40 years ago, right? So it's developing relationships over a long period of time. And we do that by being in touch with them. I'm constantly trying to talk to them either in person at shows or, contacting them by email or phone or whatever it is. It's building that relationship, also doing it through our listeners in a way. So our listeners will say, hey, I really like this company. And, I'll use the listener as a reference. Hey, one of our listeners recommended we contact you. That's surprisingly effective, actually. And then you're always there. You're always reminding them in a way. They have to see you also. They have to see your shows. They have to have their customers talking about your shows. And you're just always there in social media. We're popping up, and we're just a constant reminder that we're there. Some of the sponsors that I've gotten in the last year during COVID time, I've been talking to for 10 years. And now they're just finally catching up to the rest of the world going, hey, podcasts really are a thing. So, that's been our biggest struggle in the horse world is they tend to be behind technologically. So it's always catching up. Then once you get them, that's a different story. Now you really have to work with them. So you really have to work with them to get them engaged and involved. So we try and do different things. We try and have the sponsors do segments if we can. We try and have them on the show. So, we get them on a regular basis. They have to feel like they're part of it. If they feel like they're part of it, they're going to stay with you. It doesn't even matter so much what they're seeing at the back end. It matters that they feel like they're part of the show and that they're part of the whole experience. And then they hang with you. We have a retention rate. Our retention rate's 70% over 4 years. So 70% of our sponsors have been with us over 4 years. Some 10, 12 years now. And it's because they're engaged and they feel like they're part of the family. Glenn, and that's the most important thing we've done.
Sorry to interrupt you there.
Yeah.
For folks on Clubhouse or maybe who don't know how big the Horse Radio Network is, when you kind of quote your network stats, what do you say? Because the average podcaster that has 500 downloads may be saying, "Yeah, that's great advice, Glenn, but I get 500."
Yeah, but our downloads.
How big is your network?
We have 20 shows, and we have shows that get the Horses in the Morning show's our biggest show. That's in the thousands and thousands of downloads every day. And then we have some shows that get a couple hundred. So it's the gambit in there with all 20 of the shows. But the other thing is consistency. We're very consistent. I preach that every time I talk, is you've got to be consistent. If you expect to have a sponsors are getting smart. Even the smaller sponsors now are getting smart. And they'll look at your podcast and go, well, First of all, you were weekly, then you were every other week, and then you did one a month, and then you didn't do any for a couple months, and now you're back. How do I? They're concerned, and this is my concern too, before they come on the networks. How do I know you're not going to fall into that pattern again? So I pay you to do a weekly show, and then you're not doing them, and I've already paid you. Am I guaranteed to get what I'm supposed to get?
Yeah.
So that's something that if you want sponsors eventually, you've got to be consistent, because they're going to look at that. And if you're not consistent, then that's a good excuse for them not to use you. Right.
Yep.
So consistency is so important when you're looking at getting a sponsor in the future. They want to see consistency in the past.
Yeah,
It
don't
also
give them a
shows you're
reason
just
to leave.
responsible, right?
That's it.
Yeah.
Well, we do have a question from the chat room.
Yeah.
They need to know, how is the shirt fitting? Are they
Okay.
running big?
I usually wear extra large, and I can tell after this is washed that it's just going to fit. So definitely they do not run small. Okay. Or I mean, they do run probably a little small, is what I meant to say. So go larger. Go larger than smaller is what I would say. After it's washed, I can tell it's going to shrink a bit.
I'm gonna say I actually shrunk the one I'm wearing, and it seems okay.
It does?
So,
Okay.
yeah,
I haven't
so,
washed it yet.
This shirt is available at podcastclothes.com. That's a fun one to say. I don't know why. And right
Is
now,
this your site, or is this all yours, Dave?
That is my site. Yeah. And currently, TeePublic is running a 35% off sale. So go get yourself a podcast shirt.
I need Almost Famous Podcaster. I like that one. I gotta get that one.
Did you come up with those designs, Dave?
No, what's cool about this site, if you've never played with TeePublic, like I made obviously the Don't Be Boring one, but a lot of these are, well, here, let me go back to sharing my screen. A lot of these are other people have put them on there. And then what's cool about TeePublic is, you earn a small, and I mean small, bit of profit from that, but some of that goes to whoever made the design. So you can see I love this one, Anything But a Yeti. I love that t-shirt.
Why does the Yeti get so much hate? It's not that bad.
It's just used horribly.
No,
you know?
well, but Dave,
because
I
they
did.
all do it like this back
I know.
here and
Well,
scream at it.
Hey, I just had this. I say that, and then this week I was working with somebody, and she had just bought it, and she was doing, Dave. It was, it was pointing straight at her, and she was talking into it, and it didn't sound great. And I said, okay, I want you to do a few things for me. First, stand the mic up straight, like let's get that thing, and then I'm like, turn it around so the label faces you. And as soon as she did that, like the sound just went, oh,
that's it.
There were angels in the background, right?
Yeah.
And so I get it. I get people don't use it correctly, but
that's really the biggest problem.
Mic.
So
yeah,
we should remind everyone listening in Clubhouse, if you have a question, all you have to do is raise your hand, and we'll bring you up on stage. Just know that means you're going to get recorded. So
Can I throw one other nugget in here before we go? I think it's with 2 million podcasts now passing this week. I realize only a couple 100,000 are active, but still, we've just passed 2 million podcasts. Everything that we're doing now, we're doing with the mindset of how is it different? We've got to be different. You can't. I'm not a big advocate now of bringing shows on the network that are just interview shows, that are just one big long interview. It's, we're going more segments than we ever have in the past, shorter segments, shorter interviews, more segments. And how are we different than the 10,000 other podcasts out there? What makes us different? What are we doing that's unique? Or how can we make it different? It's so important right now if you're going to stand out at all.
But Glenn, that's a hard question to answer. I don't want to answer a hard question. I just want to talk into a microphone and have somebody give me money for no apparent reason at all.
It is hard.
Yeah,
well,
it is.
Glenn, I think what you're saying too is it requires some creativity and some work. And we're getting away from the I'm just going to show up with two guys and a mic, or I'm just going to do an interview show. I think it does. It's requiring more. Now, the beauty of it is you still can do that if you want.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
No one's saying no. No one's taking down your podcast.
And you can do a good interview show that's different than everybody else's, but make it different.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, right on.
Glenn, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
Little pop quiz. What do you wish you knew when you first started podcasting? Is there anything when you look back and go, oh man, I wish I would have known that?
I wish I knew when I started podcasting. I wish I had known it was going to take so long for the world to catch up. to podcasting, because I might have done things a little bit differently. I might have, instead of counting on podcasting, I counted on podcasting to become a thing long before it did. Because you and I both started. I started 2006, so I thought I thought 2010 and 11 we were going to be getting there. Yeah, we talked about that back then. We thought we were going to be getting there, and then we never did. And then all of a sudden, it was 4 years ago we started to get there, and now the last 2 years we're getting there. I waited too long. I would have had a side hustle built into the whole thing, and I would have been making a lot more money now. I don't know what that side hustle is. I don't know what that other thing was, but I would have taken, instead of throwing all my eggs in this basket, I would have had a couple baskets, and that's where I made a mistake.
There you go.
Yeah,
that's
awesome,
Glenn. That's actually very transparent. I appreciate that. Honestly,
no, it is, and I'm making less money now than I probably did in sales, but then I was in financial sales in a good time, so I'm having more fun now, so I'm enjoying it more. But it's the constant thing of one. I'm the salesman also, so I'm selling the ads, so I'm constantly working that all the time, and then we're always trying to think about how to do things differently. We have a lot more competition. For the first 10 years, we were the only ones doing horse podcasts. And now there's 100 of them, right? And of course they start and in 6 months they're gone. Hardly any of them are hanging around. But we always are thinking, we're number one. What can I do number one in our space that others can't do? So one of the things we're doing this year is we're going on a road trip. So we're going 5 weeks, and we're taking our camper, and we're going to be staying at listener farms. And we're going 14 states, staying at listener farms, doing meetups at listener farms, doing trail rides, concerts. We're coming to Dave's house up in Ohio for a couple days. So we're going to be doing that because we can do it. I sold that out in sponsorships in a week, because also another tidbit is sponsors love one-offs. They love that better than they do committing for a long period of time. They love sponsoring one-off events. It's much easier for them to wrap their brain around, and they want to be part of it. So for me, selling one-offs is easier than selling long-term sponsorships.
That's
nice.
That's gold right there, to be honest.
Yeah.
And thinking about, I think for podcasters going into the ad space that are not doing it today, the target probably to start is one-offs, as opposed to like, hey, go with me for a year. Like, well, okay, you don't really have any track record. The one-offs may be more helpful that way.
Yeah.
Kim just piped in Glenn in Ohio. I know she lives near you, Dave. So
Yeah,
parties at your house, apparently.
That's it. I'll have to get things in order.
Jeez, I might even drive out for that.
How far west are you going, Glenn?
We're hitting Tennessee for a concert in Nashville with some friends of ours. We're putting on a concert for a fundraiser for a charity, a therapeutic riding center. We're hitting Alabama. We're going to stop at a couple farms there. Then we're going into up to Michigan to do a big trail ride up there, and then Ohio, Pennsylvania, Maryland, the Carolinas, Virginia. We're going to be visiting 15 listener farms. Along the way, and we'll do the shows from their farms, and we're going to have meetups all along the way and parties, and just have a good time.
Here's the beauty of this: you're either going to end up with great content or a great story, which of course is great content.
Either one's great content. It's going to suck, or we're going to add video to this. I think this needs video, so we're definitely adding video to this. This what we've never done before, so we're doing that.
Do you guys have a YouTube channel?
Yeah, I mean, we've never really used it.
Okay. Are you going to use it for this?
Yes.
For this time?
Yeah, and we're going to get the video. Neil over at Wild Style Media is going to be editing our videos, and we're going to put one out a week. So we'll do all the footage, send it over, and he'll put them out every week. So we're going to get it professionally done.
It's a great idea.
Scooter making the trip?
No, Scooter's not making the trip. It's my pony. He's not going to make the trip. We can't haul us and the horse trailer. We can't haul our camper and the horse trailer at the same time. So.
I've seen quite a few YouTubers as doing these kinds of things, and they ship their video daily to an editor who then is 3 or 4 days behind, but then posting regular daily updates. And I think that's fantastic. That's a great way to energize your YouTube channel. It's a great way to get your listeners involved. It's a one-off too. If you're not regularly doing it, this is a content one-off that I think helps. You may get some of your listeners like, oh, I'm not a regular. I don't watch a lot of stuff on YouTube, but for this, I'll head over and subscribe to make sure I stay up with the daily.
Well, and we were very deliberate in choosing not to go to Olympians farms and the big farms. We want to go to listener farms because listeners are curious about other listeners. They want to see how how people like them live, right? They want to see their barns. They want to see their horses. So, we can go to the Olympian farms and do that along the way, but I don't think it would be as interesting. It wouldn't be as fun for us either. I think it's going to be fun going to listener farms. I think that's what makes us different. And we can do it because we can afford to do it, whereas our competition can't.
Right.
So,
yeah.
There you go.
That's awesome.
That's a great example.
Sorry, Dave.
August. So, Dave, we're going to give you the dates, and you better be home. So.
All right. That would be the ultimate. Oh, sorry, I'm
out of town.
I'm talking at Poughkeepsie. Yeah.
You've been in my studio. I've never been in yours.
Oh, it's a mess right now. It's always a mess. So it's always fun.
Well, I determined we're gonna have to stay at a campground, though. I looked at I looked at your house on Google Maps, and overhead, there's no room for us there.
There's no room. No,
it's a little stalkerish, Glenn.
Yeah,
I would be honest.
Yeah,
you sounded like a stalker there for a second.
I would love to have you, but when I don't. It's not much of a joke when I say I can reach out the window and grab the salt shaker off my neighbor's.
It's true. I saw that.
It's these are little houses built back in the days when the rubber plants and the rubber factories were huge in Akron, Ohio, and they all look the same.
It's yours.
It's
your
mine.
little slice of Ohio.
Yeah. So awesome.
Well, thanks guys for having me on today. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Glenn. Always great to see you.
And buy your shirt. Where again, Dave? Where do you buy shirts?
Podcastclothes.com.
There you go.
Awesome.
Thanks,
guys. Buddy.
Stay well, my friend. Stay well.
Oops, sorry about that.
Did you kick him out, Dave?
I was here. Let's do that better. Thanks, Glenn.
You're welcome. Thank you.
There we go. Much better. And
you have you got a trigger finger. Sometimes.
I do. Just,
can you support me on the pour?
I can definitely support you on the pour, and this is where we thank our awesome supporters. And right now, the Teacher's Pet still. Which I'm very happy about. Dog Podcast Network. Glenn, did you know that if your horse does not shake the water off its body when it gets out of the tub, which is really annoying, it will die? I did not know that. Yeah, wow. If you listen to Dog Edition, that was in the episode along with Why Do Dogs Hump, of course. So if you have a dog and you're a dog person, if you identify as a dog person, you want to check out dogpodcastnetwork.com. And of course, there's actually looking for stories. You can win up to $5,000. Check it out, dogpodcastnetwork.com. And we want to thank our $20 supporters. Awesome people like Shane at spybrary.com. Ed Sullivan. I actually met with Ed this week. He's such a nice guy. I mean, I've been with him before and up in Boston. But if you're looking for an editor, check out Ed at soniccupcake.com. Felix over at the Latin Podcast Awards. He was actually on the new media show last week. I heard him over there talking to Todd and Rob. So if you have a Latin podcast, you might want to check him out again. Latin Podcast Awards brought to you by the Dice Network. Oh! And then we just heard him, Glenn the Geek Hebert over at horseradionetwork.com. 20 shows. Did you hear that, Jim?
Yeah.
20. My brain hurts when I think about that. So if you are into horses, check out Glenn over at horseradionetwork.com. Max Trescott up in the air at aviationnewstalk.com. So if you're into planes, check him out over there. If you're into money, check out Greg at debtshepherd.com, where he is teaching financial wellness. Again, that's debtshepherd.com. Kim, we talked about her just a couple seconds ago from Toastmasters101.net. If you're looking to develop your voice, reduce your editing time, and improve your content, then you want Toastmasters. Greg over at the Indie Drop-In Network. You can find that at indiedropin.com. If you've got a true crime show, a comedy show, or a scary kind of story show, then definitely check him out. indiedropin.com. He's helping find people. He basically has an audience that's looking for your type of stuff. You know what? Michael gave me the slide and I forgot to update the PowerPoint. That's so... Oh, that drives me nuts. Anyway, Michael Delaney over at babymountainradio.com. He's got Baby Mountain Radio Productions because I asked him, I'm like, hey, send that to me.
I know, you've been begging him to do that.
And I just realized he sent it to me this week, and I'm like, oh, you know what? I never updated the stupid thing. So check out Mike over at Baby Mountain Radio Productions. And if you'd like to be an awesome supporter, go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. And if you want to do things like sponsor Jim's Cup or do a one-time donation or all those other, I have to add podcast close to that, I guess, over there.
do, for sure.
All our stuff is at askthepodcastcoach.com/store. So again, anybody listening in Clubhouse, if you want to come up on stage, feel free to raise your hand and we'll bring up on stage. If you're watching us on YouTube, feel free to go to askthepodcastcoach.com/join. That's what Glenn did and brought him up on stage. So one thing we did kind of mention here, if you haven't heard, we went over 2 million active podcasts. It's not active, 2 million podcasts total in Apple Podcasts. And then if you go into the stats, that's where you see the one I always like to look at. The one that really counts in my book is how many, like right now, 37% of those are active, or 757,000, meaning that they've put out at least one episode in the last 90 days. And if you go down a little further, how many have more than 10 episodes? That is, let me look at this graph here. That's this one, 734,000. So if you're like 2 million, I'll never, it's going to be hard to be found in that big giant wad of podcasts, but there's only 734,000.
That's still a lot though, Dave. 700,000 podcasts is still a lot.
Yeah. And that's where, like Glenn was talking about, how am I going to stand out? And the other thing to think of is, what if you come up with, I don't know how I'm going to stand out. Don't let that stop you from starting. You may find that later. As Glenn was talking about, some of the stuff he does just happens by accident. I have a guy that just started the school of podcasting. They do the Pro Football Fast Break podcast. And it's a guy from radio and his 2 high school / college sons. And I said, that's a hook. I just don't know what it is. I said, that's what's going to make you guys different. I said, most other podcasters are not related. I said, unless it's a husband-wife team, things like that. Mm-hmm. I said, so I don't know if there's a way we can somehow bring the fact that you guys are father and son, into the podcast. I go, that would make you different. Because especially if you think about it, sports is an area that I scratch my head on. Number one, because I live near Cleveland, Ohio, and all of our teams suck. And then the other one is,
hey, the Browns did pretty well.
Yeah,
this
the Browns are ruining that phrase. Yes, we're no longer calling the stadium the factory of sadness. So, but if you think about sports, it's people talking about other people, and again, that really you're talking about things that you're very passionate about.
Right.
But in the end, we're all talking about the guys on the field and we hope they win. And then if they do or they don't, then we talk about what we think they did wrong. And everybody's doing really the same thing. It's all analyzing. And, some people are into the whole, they get into the, what do you call it, fantasy football thing, where you pick people and things like that. So it's hard sometimes to stand out. And that's where you just have to know, like Glenn said, he wished he'd known how long it was going to take for kind of the audience to catch up to podcasts.
It's always that way though. I mean, it's always slower than you think. In any industry, in anything, every once in a while you'll have something, TikTok is probably a good example of that, where that thing exploded and went hyperbolic, hyperbolic very, very quickly. You have a few things like that, but I think most everything else just takes a little bit of time, and so the key is to stick it out. I think it's just to continue to, if you love doing it, like if you're doing podcasting as a job, and by the way, that's fine if you do it that way, and you don't necessarily love it, but you're doing it for other reasons, and those other reasons disappear, stop doing it. Just stop. It doesn't make it, that doesn't make any sense. If you're in this because you love getting on the mic, like I wake up every Saturday morning and I am like, man, I cannot wait till 9:30. Like I go out and brew the coffee and I have all my whole routine set up. Right. I mean, my Saturdays kind of revolve around Ask the Podcast Coach because it's so much fun. There's very little in this for me if we were thinking about money or fame, right. Or some of those kinds of things. But I love doing it. So I'm going to keep doing it, Dave, until you call me that one dreaded day and say, Jim, we're not going to do Ask the Podcast Coach anymore.
It's not fun anymore.
We're not going to do it anymore. I hope we're a long way from that. But I think you have to kind of, if you love doing it, just keep doing it. as we had Glenn on here talking about podcast advertisers, I think there's a misconception among podcasters. Sometimes you got to punch out of your own network. So you're going to have to pay. It's just not going to happen naturally. You're going to have to pay to punch through your own bubble, so to speak. You have this bubble around you of where you have influence, and you're going to have to pay to get outside of that. And that may be paying to get on somebody else's podcast or paying to have an ad somewhere where people will see it. If I had a horse podcast and Glenn would let me, I would pay to be on Glenn's podcast. Like I would pay to be a guest because that's a big network, right? That would punch me out of my bubble. I think that's the mistake a lot of podcasters make is they're like, how do I do this? But I don't want to pay anything. And it's like, well, okay, then it's going to take a long time.
Well, we go back to the thing we talked about a couple of weeks ago. What is it? Good, fast, and cheap, right? And you can only pick two. So if you're going cheap, then it might be, wait, I have that backwards because that means it's going to be good and fast. That's not right. I have to figure that out. But yeah, it's not the case. We do have a question in the chat room.
Yeah.
Michael from babymountainradio.com says, gentlemen,
who sent you a slide that you haven't updated
that I didn't put in. Yes. Gentlemen, I haven't put out a new episode of the podcast for about 2 years now. Michael did a show about dementia. Caregiving for Dementia, I believe was the title. And he said, I'm getting 535 downloads in March. My question is, how long should I leave it on Libsyn? Well, if you take it off of Libsyn, it goes, your podcast dies. So I would do one of two things. Definitely do this one, unless you want stats. If you want stats, go down to the $7 a month plan. So depending on what plan you're already on, that will save you because then that's going to mean you can't upload any new files over 50 megs, but you're not uploading new files, so that's not going to be a problem. The other thing you can look at is if you're like, you know what, I'm done. I'm never going to add more stuff to this, but I want it to be out there for people to listen to. That's, to me, when you move to a free service. I'm not a big fan of Anchor and Red Circle and things like that. Although if somebody said pick one, I'd go Red Circle before I went to Anchor. But although you could throw it on Anchor and then do an ad for Anchor and get paid 0.0017 cents when somebody hears it. But that would be something, you could think about. If you're like, look, this is, I don't want to kill it, but I'm not going to be adding to it. So either downgrade to the $5/$7 plan or move to a free host. And then that way, I had a website, and Kim went through this too. There are times when you put your websites in places and then something happens and you get the WordPress screen of death and you're like, you know what? That's a website I don't even play with anymore. And yeah, it's gone and who cares? I'm not going to rebuild it. So when I move stuff to a free host or things like that, it's usually a podcast that if for some reason the free service goes out of business, I don't really care. It's kind of been sunsetted anyway. I don't know. Thoughts, Jim?
Well, I put everything also over at the Internet Archive, right? And it's not a host, not intended to be a host provider. In fact, that's a nonprofit, I think, and some other things, but they're trying to archive the internet. I'm kind of hoping that will outlive me because like my host provider eventually is going to go away. I'm going to go away. I'm hoping that stays around so that would be another option if you wanted to leave it out there and point people towards it. If you just didn't want it to go away forever, that'd be a great place to put it. It's got it can host those things and people can go over there and listen. By the way, that's what they intended with the Internet Archive. It's intended to be a place to really keep track of everything that ever happened on the internet. So don't be afraid to put it there. Just don't use it as a host provider. That's not.
And they don't have a feed, right?
No, they don't have a feed. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think so. You can point to it like it's you could put it.
Yeah.
You have a mp3 thing you can point to for your feed. Like you could do it in WordPress, create a feed, and that could serve. I don't know why they don't block that in some way, but
yeah,
it's not great.
So if you're using PowerPress, you could update all your MP3 files to be, instead of Libsyn or Captivate or whoever, it could be.
You could point them over there.
But then you still have a website that you're paying for. That's where
you do. And there's no guarantee that the Internet Archive is going to stay around forever.
No,
right?
that's true.
This is the thing. Every year they raise money to, it's like the Library of Congress. They raise money and you're like, okay, in theory, this thing is designed to be around a long time, but that doesn't mean 50 years from now it's still going to be a thing. Think of all the podcasting companies that have started and have left that I mean, some of them a long time ago now. We're talking 10 years since some of those have gone out of business. So
Yeah.
you got to, the only way to guarantee your stuff stays around is for you to pay for it. That guarantees it will stay someplace if you're paying for it. But otherwise, it's kind of a crapshoot.
Yeah. Dan in the chat room says, we were talking about how to stand out and we're talking about sports. He says, you can boil that down really to everything, not just sports podcasts. A podcast about podcasting is always talking about people talking into a mic, but there still are a lot of unique shows. I can say this. I found a podcast in Overcast called Real Talk, and it caught my eye because, Brendan, I think Brandon from Utah Podcast Summit. He's in the chat room a lot. I think was a guest, and I was like, oh, cool. And it was called Real Talk. And what's interesting is I then went looking for it. Do not name your show Real Talk, because there are no less than 15 shows called Real Talk Podcast. And I was like, not knocking those guys for naming it that. I was just amazed at but I literally, I can't find their podcast on the web. I'll probably have to go into iTunes because I'm on a PC, find their show and click on the website link to actually take me to their website.
Yeah, you almost need the author to separate it out, right? Because
Yeah.
the author tag is searchable. So you could go to iTunes and search Real Talk and then the name of the author, and they'll probably find it that way.
Yeah. I have in my notes here in Trello, and this really ties in. I didn't plan it this way. This was in Tom Webster's latest newsletter. And if you're not reading Tom Webster's newsletter, you should be. This is a guy from Edison Research, and he always has me going, ooh, like if you could make me think. But he said for podcasting, he goes, people always say content is king or queen, or it's some sort of monarch. And he goes, as we look at podcasting now, he's now changing that. What would you say is really the king when it comes to holding people's attention and growing your audience
Today, what's king?
Yeah,
man, I think that's
if it's not content.
Well, I mean, it's always content. Like it boils down to it. But I think, again, we go back to what we talked about in the beginning of the show, which is what is interesting and what is and I think if you're competing on content and you're providing the exact same content, you have to make people feel comfortable listening to you, whatever that is, right?
Well, his word for that, and you're on the right path, personality.
Yeah.
If you think about it, that's
right.
really what, and that's, if you think about the news, I always bring that up as an example. Every night there's, ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox, plus, CNN, NBC. And usually the reason, like if I watch the morning news, which I haven't done in about probably, I maybe watch it 3 times in the last year, because it was like every channel was the COVID channel. Right. And I just got out of the habit of watching the morning news. But I watched, and people like, Fox News. I didn't watch Fox News because but I watched it because it's Sissy and Glenn and the other really hot brunette whose name is escaping me.
Easy now, easy.
Yeah, I know. But that's why I watched it. And they were, and then they had Andre and they were all very, almost to the point of like, wow, you guys are almost unprofessional, because they're always laughing and joking.
Oh, yeah.
I remember the one time I tuned in, and the one guy, I think his name is Glenn. No, that's Glenn the Geek. Anyway, there was a guy, the main anchor dude was marrying somebody.
Bob. We'll just
Bob.
Yeah.
Bob was actually marrying a couple on the news, and I was like, it must be a slow news day because Bob is making the news. And I was like, that was weird.
Well, you kind of got to wonder too. Sometimes we wander off the path thinking being very different is the key, right? And so, maybe they had gotten a news director, had gotten a new team that was like, hey, let's be as unique as possible, trying all these different things to see. No, hey, if that's what they were doing, you can't fault them for trying. Maybe they were trying to bring a little levity to news after the last summer and last fall and last January. Like, listen, it's been a rough year for news, right? And so maybe they were trying to bring some levity to it. But they're trying. I mean, they're trying. At least they tried different things to see what would stick. To Glenn's point, a lot of the best things that end up in shows happen by accident, and then they just become a happy accident that you kind of depend on over time. And people are, if we stop doing the coffee pour, we get a couple comments from people like, "Hey, where's the pour? And like, we do it every week. I know, but where's the pour? So people begin to depend and look for some of those things I honestly believe in our chat room, there is some consistency in there of their friends. Like, they come every week. This is their time to spend time with each other is our chat room. If we stop doing this, Dave, there would be some who go, what am I going to do on Saturday mornings? Like, you're part of my routine now. We've been doing this for 6 years or whatever.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, you're part of my routine. You're part of our consistency is comforting or is helpful to others who it's built into every Saturday morning. I used to run on Saturday mornings. That was I would run races. I've stopped doing that because I don't want to miss the show. Right?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. Probably starting in a couple of weeks.
Uh-oh.
Where now this show now the show comes out usually later on this afternoon. It might start coming out on Monday, because the one thing I really miss is exercising on Saturdays. I used to go out and ride my bike, and man, by the time I get done with Ask the Podcast Coach, and I've got 2 video versions and 2 audio versions, it's like the day's done. So, but we had a great comment in the chat room here. Engaging conversations and host rapport can override some barriers. The key, I believe, is spreading the word, especially in your chosen community and genre, which brings me to Dave Jackson's equation for podcast growth, and that is value in the episode multiplied by smart promotion equals total number of downloads. Because if you have no value, well, 0 times anything is 0. And if you have a lot of value, but you don't promote it, well, it will grow with a trickle. So value times smart promotion equals downloads. And that's, again, not easy, as I say. It's like, well, it just takes a while. So,
well, and I think sometimes smart promotion isn't as smart as you think. I think sometimes you do some things and you think you're being smart and it goes nowhere. And then sometimes you do nothing and it breaks out beyond itself. And I think you have to be there to take advantage of it when it, kind of when it does happen. I remember years ago, I got an opportunity to write for Byte magazine. So I wrote an article on a now extinct tablet, the HP Smart tablet or something. I can't even remember what it was. And on Byte magazine, they put a link to my website, and the biggest spike I have ever seen on my website ever was that week. And Dave, I'm talking exponential spike. This, I went from dozens a day to thousands a day, right? Bam. And it hit and it stayed for a couple days, and then it began to kind of trickle off. And it was a huge opportunity. And I'm, today I'm not sure that any of those people are left. But it was an opportunity. You can't pass up on that. But it also doesn't necessarily mean I was going to be popular forever because I had one post.
The book I'm reading right now, it's an ebook. I wish it was. It's the one I talked about where I had to go through 47 conversions to get it on my Kindle, but it's called the Creator's Compass, and he says it's not about getting a new listener, it's about keeping a new listener. Yeah. And I was like, man, that's again easier said than.
What's the conversion, right? That's what you're talking about. It's converting them. It's not just, it's just not eyeballs on the site, but how do I convert them into an active? And I think for us, there's 2 measures now. The one is the comments in the chat room. Like, I think that is a really good indication of how healthy we are, because you can't manipulate it. You can't sell it. You can't buy it. The chat room happens because of engagement, right? Yep. Same thing within Clubhouse, right? The Clubhouse folks, you can't, it's maybe a little easier to manipulate it on Clubhouse with some of the things that they allow you to do, but the Clubhouse engagement, I think, speaks to that. So those are 2 really big marks of engagement that I say, if all of a sudden our chat room died, Dave, I would go, we have a problem.
Well, that, and that's half the thing that makes the show fun is the chat room. Yeah. We have 34 people right now watching on YouTube. Right. We have another, we're dropping people like flies right now in Clubhouse. We're down.
I know that's because those YouTube people are better than those Clubhouse people. I don't know who would ever say otherwise.
Well, I have one question before we wrap up the regular show. For those listening on Clubhouse, we do another half hour here. So in about 5 minutes, it's going to sound like we're ending the show, but we're not. And I've run into now 2 people that they explain to themselves that, look, I have multiple passions. I like this, I like that, and I'm like, and I was like, okay. And I'm asking the question now, and I'm calling it multi-passion. I've now I don't know if anybody else has coined that phrase, but I'm saying I coined it. At least I coined it here. Can multi-passion be a niche? Does it make any sense? Like, can I'm making a show for people who have multiple passions.
Yeah.
Because I can't be the only person that likes multiple things.
Yeah.
And I was like,
multiple meaning like very different ideas, like horses and podcasting. Those are 2 different. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, kind of. And they just, because part of me goes, all right, well, it looks like you can't pick a topic, but if you can kind of get them somewhat, I always point to Jordan Harbinger. Jordan Harbinger has a wide variety of people on his show, but they're all about critical thinking. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's like, so it's an astronaut, it's an actress, it's an athlete, but it's all about how to think better.
Almost can variety be a niche, right? That's kind of what we're saying. I do this on Home Gadget Geeks. I mean, we had a reviewer from Canada on one week talking about phones and tablets, and the next week we had a guy talking about water purification, and then this week we kind of talked about ultra wide monitors, right? But it's all tech related.
Yeah. This was, I don't have her name. This was in the Podcast Movement Facebook group. She says, does anyone else have a podcast based around an idea and not really a subject? I cover a lot of different topics, but my podcast is based on having deep discussions and skipping the small talk. I'm struggling with marketing because I'm not boxed in with my one niche like true crime or paranormal or whatever. I have several different series that I rotate through the months. Would love tips on how to market a show that covers a lot of different things. So that's what I was like, well, you know,
it's harder, by the way. I think marketing that is harder.
That's it. That's my whole thing is like, you can do it, but just realize that, you know, it's not the 70s and Flip Wilson and Ed Sullivan and all the other, you know, you think about, is there a variety show now on TV that where you'll see an author and a singer? I mean, the closest thing you have is some of the talent shows.
Yeah, I was going to say America's Got Talent and some of those, or Britain's Got Talent. Insert the name of your country in there, Got Talent. I think some of those have replaced the variety. Remember the old Gong Show?
Oh, man.
Listen, children. I mean, adults today. If you haven't seen episodes of the Gong Show, just go out to YouTube and watch it. It is like nothing you will ever see anywhere else ever. How that got on TV, I don't know.
Well, that and the fact that it was always interesting to see who the judges were going to be, because that was kind of like the Dancing with the Stars.
Yes,
at the time it was like sea level. It's like, hey, it's Jamie Farr from MASH.
Yeah,
you know,
and it
MASH
meant
is Klinger.
the judges, what they said meant nothing.
No.
It wasn't even, there was no prizes, and it wasn't, and then it would end in chaos. Like, you just gotta watch it. I mean,
wasn't there some sort of, I know if you didn't get gonged, you'd then get a score.
Yeah.
And I think, but wasn't it something like, you know, $100 or something? Like the price was like,
it was
almost like a handshake.
I'm pretty sure they were high most of the time they were doing that show.
Yeah. Well, didn't it turn out, was that true that guy was like in the FBI? Or something like that?
The host of that show?
Yeah. Chuck, was it Chuck Barris? Something
yes,
Barris.
It was. No, it was Chuck Barris. I think that's right.
Kim says
he was
there's
loony. He was loony as the day is long.
That guy. Well, what was that? 80s? Late 70s?
Late 70s.
Yeah, because I'm sensing a lot of cocaine was being consumed on that show or something. It was wacky.
All right, so we've gone down the. So anyways, go Google the Gong Show if you want to. Every once in a while, when I just want to remember how wacky the 70s was, just go out there and do that. It was a long time ago. But back to the point. I think when you're doing variety, it's a little bit harder to not only advertise for it, to get advertisers for it, but also to promote it, because you don't know. This may be an area, and I know we're butting right up against the end here, but this might be an area where a future schedule or keeping your listeners very in the know of what's coming up may be helpful. Maybe that would be a help for variety.
Yeah, even Jordan Harbinger, I listened to his next to the last episode, he interviewed Leah Raimi, I think her name is. She's the big anti, Tom Cruise religion thingy. Scientology.
There you go.
She was in Scientology for like 40 years. And so Jordan was interviewing her, and he's like, look, he goes, not all of my shows are going to have a checklist and things like that. He goes, I don't want you to think all the time. He's like, but this is an interesting story. And he's talked about the psychology of cults in the first place. So, and it was really interesting hearing some of the stuff that they talked about. But speaking of people talking about things that are talking about things, what's coming up on theaverageguy.tv?
Nice segue. I like that. Actually, so this week we spent a bunch of time talking about monitors. I moved the monitors around in my studio. I took the two 1080p monitors, moved them to the work side, and moved the ultra wide onto the Mac, and it changed my life. So we spent a bunch of time. Is an ultra wide worth it? Some of those kinds of things. I'll publish it a little bit later out at theaverageguy.tv.
Got it. And on the School of Podcasting, we're answering that question. What is the one thing you wish you knew when you started podcasting? So thanks to the chat room and thanks to Clubhouse. Stick around. We're not done yet. We'll be back in about, 10 seconds with more questions.